Good evening again. This is your announcer, Gottlieb Wiedermeyer. Speaking to you from the black and blue room high atop the Roosevelt Hotel here in New Orleans, where the band will start this evening's musical milieu by playing that ever-popular song that greeted our doughboys coming home from WW1. How you going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen the farm? But I guess it's a good thing those tunesmiths did not go overboard back then, expand the concept, the idea of the farm into like the planet Earth. Think about that. And what I've been, in the ways in which I've been verbally sketching for the last few nights, I will go ahead and assume, but I'm going to point it out. So to say I assume is somewhat of a misnomer. So I want to point out my use of the word temporal, surely everyone understands, is as opposed to spatial. I'm using it, that is, in referring to time. It has nothing to do with theological use or even linguistic, rhetorical use. It specifically means in reference to time, and really in my case, even more so, if I must point out, specifically as opposed to vis-a-vis, do-si-do, space. So that's all I mean by temporal. It has no other connotation. Every time I'm using that, I'm using it as an adverb or an adjective at times, referring to outlooks, activities, ways in which you'd be thinking that would be related to time as opposed to space, whatever that may mean. Insofar as talking about time, and since I have now started using temporarily that kind of phrase of in the future, and me even saying that would be a more specific, a more telling description of ephemerally of this kind of activity, what it might be up to, rather than calling it some sort of specific endeavor or that's supposed to make a person be this way or that way. You can refer to it as in the future. But even when I say in the future, we should be a little more specific, should we not? Why not? Here in New Orleans, everything's more specific if you want it to be. So let's look at it this way. What would be from the best earthbound, verbally spatial definition, what might it be? The future. For the immediate one, the first one I would offer to you is that the future, from the best view you can take, from the best sighting you can take as long as you're still rooted here on Earth, is that you're talking about unexecuted alternatives. There is a sub-species, I guess, that I could say it's also unrealized possibilities that people have thought of as being that one, and the other one would be even things that they had not thought of as possibilities. So you would have the two classes of simply those things that humans have thought of but have been unable to execute. They have been unattainable alternatives. And the other one would be, a little stranger to most people, would simply be things that nobody ever thought about. That would be the future. But take the first one, which would seem to be somewhere within the grasp of at least verbalization. If the future is not something spatial, which I repeat to you again, is really all the human intellect is capable of under ordinary conditions, is even though they may call time the fourth dimension, and I am as aware as, I guess, any good high school graduate, of how, in most ready use, they refer to, under pretty neighborhood conditions, speaking of physics, of time as being the fourth dimension. It's another way in which you have got to graph out location, that you have got to graph out the existence of something if you're going to be that much more specific, read scientific, then you have got to take into consideration time, and they quite easily, and for their own purposes, refer to it as the fourth dimension. And I guess it is now somewhat into the general wiring system of the educated public. But it is not a change. It is not a change. It would seem to be that they have jumped to another category. to say that we've got 3 dimensions that we can measure. You can feel them. You can feel breadth, height, and depth. Time, you cannot feel it. That is, you cannot hold it in your hand. You cannot touch it. And the only way we can measure it is arbitrarily by something such as a watch. We do have what would seem to be the natural basis for it, the movement of the heavens, but that is still fairly local. Even if you're using what seems to be your solar system, you're still not using any universal clock movement of time. So when ordinary intellect at its best speaks of time, it's not really talking about a change in category. It's simply another direction, and there's nothing else to call it, because in a 3-dimensional world there's no way that you can measure more than 3 dimensions. And so whatever else has got to be, in a sense, non-measurable. It's got to be non-material. But there is a reality to it. The reality is, insofar as it exists intellectually, is that it is unexecuted alternatives. That is always the future. It is not something strange. It is not something spatial. It is not something drawn on a diagram, such as I can do of saying the future is down here. The past is over here, and the line goes here. It goes through you, and here you stand right in the future, right in the present. And then right past this, what's coming up, what is yet to be realized, the possibilities yet to arise, are right over here, just right in the next second, just coming up now. Now they can use that. They can use it to measure things in the 3D world the same way that they can use it to judge or to predict, even to proclaim what time the next bus will come by. But that is not any worthwhile definition of the future. The future is unexecuted alternatives. Think about it. And that leaves everything else that I told you really shouldn't not even be divided up into 3. Even though at times information maps can be presented that sounds as though the time-honored dichotomous approach of like good and evil, that there is actually 3rd alternatives, or saying that even a decent thinking machine would say, definitely, given the information, would respond either definitely true, definitely false, or if it was really good, as good as possible in the 3D world, it would have a 3rd alternative of insufficient data. In other words, it would seem as though if you're going to expand even from an ordinary view your intelligence, your insight into something, it should always go from the dichotomous to a binary choice and to at least a triaxial choice, right? Maybe. Seems like I've done it to you, but I can put it to you another way. Even when you get to the point that you think, well, I can look around, and whereas when I was a child, before I got involved in this wonderful stuff, I looked as though the same way as my grandfather and grandmother, my own nervous system did, I saw everything cut up into 2s. Everything was Whigs and Tories, Republicans, Democrats, right and wrong, up and down, etc. But now, I can always consider a 3rd alternative, a 3rd possibility. Okay, if you're that good, let's go back to this. Skip all that. Because every time you've got a 3rd alternative in the 3D world, the 3rd alternative, what it amounts to, is one that simply will not fit, such as insufficient data. Or if you get good, I'll put it to you this way. The 3rd alternative is really, at that particular time, not that space, but that particular time, what would seem to be the 3rd alternative is really a 5th column agent of one of the first 2, one of the 2 obvious ones. It is always in collusion, such as this that I was going to point out. There is no, as real as it seems, although you can look at it as being an intellectual concept, it has now become real enough. Time is not divided up into 3 dimensions for operational purposes. There is no past, present, and future. There's the past, present, which should just be one word, and there is the future. Now, I said that last time we were taping, but look at it this way. If you take my definition for the time being, take my description tonight, that the future is unexecuted alternatives. Just take that for a second. Set it aside. Then everything that's left, you would have to say, all right, then we got to divide that up into the past and the present. But think about it. If you set aside unexecuted, yet unobtained, unactivated alternatives, I don't care what they are, if you set those aside, then whatever's left, think about it. You do not need 2 categories for them. You don't. You only need 1. You can call it, I was going to call it the PP, but some of you people laughed. You thought it was some kind of crude humor, the past present. But you could call it margarine. The thing is, 1 description will handle everything else. Speaking of the future, let me point out that from a more complex view, you should not even say, you should not think the future. You should think a future. Because there is no the future. To ordinary people, to ordinary intellects, there is why they will so foolishly, in a non-judgmental sense, that is to no avail, is why they, even with credentials in a forum, will so fearlessly predict the future. Because there is no the future. There is no such thing as the future. There is a future. Try and compare that, since I see that very few people sense any great significance in that. Compare it with this. It is safe, it is usable to say that there is the local. And yet you would be better served, the way in which you're trying to think, if you were trying to do it, would be to say a, all right, and, I'd rather say a universal. But the is a quite proper article for the local. That is the local personal view, the local slice of your reality. The homegrown, your city view of reality is to call it the. But you should not really. Even though I do it while we were talking, because I hadn't gotten to this point, and I didn't want to fracture up sentences even worse than sometimes happens, which is not my fault, of course. It has to do with sunspots. And the irascible Dow Jones averages. But you can say the local reality, but you should not be saying the universal. A universal. I'm glad to see that helped. Remember, I brought that up. I was going to say, compare that, if you weren't seeing any possible significance, to saying that you should not even think. You should not be saying the future. I shouldn't say in the future, but if I had some tapings back, if I'd said in a future, then everyone would have expected I'd stop and, why did I put the sentence that way? Because there is no such thing. You just have to trust me for the time being. You don't have to, of course, but there is no the future. That is why it is so safe to predict the future. Because there is no the future, and therefore it's going to come out in a certain kind of apparent present reality whenever it happens that somebody goes back and says, well, you predicted such and such would happen to the stock market. The future is always a matter of insufficient data. That is, everybody can explain away why your prediction did not come to exact fruition. And they don't know why, and they will do it, and they don't get run out of town. Well, I'm glad to see that even helped clear it up even more. People with credentials, they will bring on a man, and I'm not talking about some soothsayer or somebody casting astrological charts. They'll bring on an economic forecaster from Harvard, a man who's writing columns, and he will predict that before the end of next quarter there will be a recession. There seems to be no doubt about it. The man is not laughed out of his job, and he'll do that over and over. Anytime they'll send a TV camera around there, the man will come out there, straighten out his bow tie, and make a prediction. All right, from one view, you would think something is amiss. Why do we not laugh this man off the stage of life? Why does the TV station keep going back? Why don't I do something about it? Of course, you just think that that may be some kind of improvement over why don't people milling out there. What's that nice little country that looks like a cowboy boot? There in the middle of St. Peter's Square, how come these hundreds of thousands of people do not suddenly look up and find some guy dressed up with a funny hat and like a woman and shoes and making comments about what's going to happen, all the way from that to your local temple to your local TV preacher? Why haven't they been laughed off the stage of life? After thousands and thousands of years of saying, well, there's no doubt about it. We're in the last times. The gods are going to come down any second now, and everybody who's not on the train is going to get left. And I'm talking about seriously left. Nobody laughs them off. The reason is, verbally now, I'm not sure any of you are going to get any better than you did 2 minutes ago. I was trying to distract you and slip back the train back on the track from another direction. The reason that life is arranged in such a way that ordinary people can apparently predict the future, which never comes to pass, with impunity is, as long as you're predicting the future, it will never come to pass, and everybody knows it in some way. Of course, life knows it's the point. It's life, again, talking to itself is always through people, and people take it very seriously. You know, it's life off, scratching its ear, you know, taking a leak, wondering, what if? And it talks through man, but anytime you're talking at a 3D level about the future, it's impossible. Because you don't have all the information. There is no way to predict the future. You could get closer or further away. But inasmuch as you're talking about a representation on a smaller dimensional level of something that's greater, no matter what you predict, it will not come to exact fruition. And without them knowing it, people know that that's true. But if you think that was confusing, if somebody could predict a future, and if some segment of humanity had some sensation of what was happening, in other words, if life, I'm not talking about somebody, some individual had the ability, it'd have to be that life had a need for this, or just one day as a practical joke on us, let one guy or woman stand up and make a prediction about a future, and then it simultaneously, life could only happen just in a split second or so, let a bunch of people hear what was actually said. Not the prediction, fuck that, but that the person says, here, I'm going to give you a guaranteed prediction. I'm getting messages. I'm going to give you a prediction of a future. Those that laugh as a joke, let's say, just for momentarily, made hear what the person said, it would scare the bejesus out of them. No offense to you Muslims. I'm glad to see that cleared it up even more. As long as you predict the future, and you don't have to do it for a living, as long as you, internally, will allow that kind of energy to run through and you predict the future of what you will do. All you're doing is recalling the past. It's an appeal to history. You're not talking about the future, but as long as you deal on the basis of, well, in the future, all right, maybe not tonight, but in the future I'm going to smoke less. I'm going to eat less chocolate. I've just decided that. Enough's enough. In the future. As long as you do that, you will not laugh yourself off the stage. Because there is an awareness that there is no the future. If you predict the future, it's not going to come to pass. If you predict the future, nobody takes it seriously, even when they apparently take it seriously. There is no such thing as the future at some less dimensional level. If we were talking about if this was X, it's the reality of the universe as we might ever know it on your best day. If it was X dimensions, then anything, X minus any number, you could not predict the full future. You can't even predict what's going to happen here. Because if you're talking about, if it was a cube, if it was a 5-dimensional figure, and it kept turning and we only got, under ordinary conditions, 4 dimensions of it. You can't even predict that the same 4 dimensions are going to keep showing up. It's why you can't predict the future. It may not even be the same 4. There is no way to say that the future is such and such. There is no way an ordinary person can say, I can guarantee you this, in the future I won't put up with this crap. In the future I will never say that again. In the future I am not going to put up with that kind of crap from a woman. And you apparently can be talking about an hour from now. Listen, I'm going to tell you what, I will not put up with that kind of stuff in the future. Young man, young woman, young person. You can say it to anybody you want to. Because it's meaningless. All you got to do is have some awareness. And for you to say, I will not do this in the future, you're telling what kind of guy you are. And I've tried to establish that in all of you. If I've had any bad influence, it should be that anytime you state what kind of guy you are, you've had it. And it doesn't matter what you say, but that is just a prime example of what kind of guy I am. You don't know? Yeah, I'll tell you the kind of guy I am. I'm the kind of guy, I know how it may look right now, but I'm the kind of guy that in the future, from now on, I've had it. From now on, young man, you'll never get this car away from me again. I'll never come home again and have you question where I've been. That's the kind of guy I am. You're talking about the future, and there is no such thing. And so it's safe. Nobody expects anything. But consider this, as long as we're high atop the course, I said the Roosevelt Hotel. In New Orleans, it's the Roosevelt Hotel. But at any rate, you know where you are. You don't need me to tell you. Spatial success in any endeavor is in getting what you expected. Whereas the felicity in temporal activities would be, at least in part, otherwise. So even though I can say, and even though the evidence is right inside your own nervous system, that there is no such thing as the future, not that can be experienced by the human nervous system as it is, not by any observation that can be made from the vantage point of planet Earth. Even though that's true, if you can get close enough to say that that is what I expected, that is the best shot at success that the ordinary nervous system can experience. I didn't mean to make that sound too oblique. Let's go back to the way I originally put it. If you just talk to ordinary people, and you got ordinary people all up and down your spine, don't brush them away now, but they're all there, or else you don't belong here. You're too exceptional and talented and brilliant, and of course by now you would have left after seeing what a sham this is. So you've got ordinary people just infiltrated your nervous system. They've been there all along, and maybe some of them just now you're beginning to realize, you know, none of us can get away from bricklayers. You can move up in the top, some penthouse. I'll be damned, you get on the elevator the first day after paying $500,000 for a condo up there, and there's going to be a bricklayer there. If your eyes are open at all and you look around, there's a bricklayer following all of us. A redneck sheriff and everything else. So at any rate, if you ask an ordinary person, what is success? And if they hemmed and hawed, if I gave them the description I started out with, would they not agree? Yes. Success is getting what you expected. That is success. So even though I say that there is no such thing as the future, the closer you can get, the closest feeling that people can experience under Earth gravity conditions is that you're close enough to getting what you expected, that if you're wired up to want to experience any success, or to say you do, then you've got to take it. Hadn't seen you in several weeks, several months. You tell me you're going to quit smoking. How's it going? You know, I told you I was going to join that group. I did, by God. And plus I signed for that $99 cassette that you listened to. Well, no, wait. I know what you're thinking. But I have cut it in half. I really have. I feel awfully good about it. I mean, I'm making great progress. That is success, even though the person could not predict the future. But the basis of spatial success is still on getting what you expected, to some degree. Real success, of course, would be that, yes, I quit. I quit drinking. I said I was going to lose 30 pounds. I lost 30 pounds. By any way that you want to stretch it verbally through the experience of Earth life, spatial success is getting what you expected. It's only reasonable. It's rational. You would not attempt to do something unless you thought there was some potential of getting what you expected. There had got to be some aim on a linear level, some point of what you're doing. I'm going to quit smoking because I think it'll make me live longer, make me breathe easier, that there is some purpose. So, the payoff, that is success by any definition under any in any spatial endeavor, is to get what you expected. But can you see that the real kind of secret felicity, the kind of triumph that wouldn't even show up on a spatial seismograph, would be, I suggest at least in part, I'm trying to give you a way out to start with, would be otherwise. Have I got to go ahead and say what otherwise and put it in 4 or 5 words and make it really sound irrational? Sometimes somebody should like that you don't really have to spell it out. If ordinary success is in getting what you expected. Extraordinary success would be otherwise. Oh, all right. You mean there'd be joy in somehow not getting what you expected? Now, I was speaking for ordinary intelligence. I didn't say that. So, but that's what an ordinary person might respond. That's what you just won't come out and say, right? No possible use for that. The whole area of insufficient data. The reality I was suggesting behind the idea that there is no the future, there is a future. Well, I'll tell you this, enough of you involved with this have stumbled along, gone far enough that you've been through this, plenty of you have, that the success, not like felicity, referring to the temporal endeavors, and we use success still with the spatial undertakings. Remember, the spatial undertakings, success is in getting what you expected. The felicity in temporal activities, however, I suggest, would be otherwise. Enough of you have been through to have the kind of felicity that you know without any doubt came from doing whatever this is. Not from me, but from you being involved and something happened. Was it what you expected? No. But not in some kind of strange or metaphysical way, because the point was there is no way to predict what this is going to do. The only way the people will predict what's going to happen is where the stakes are so low. That is ordinary life. To say, well, I'll tell you in the future I'm going to quit drinking. In the future, I'll never get mixed up with a big red-headed woman who's got biceps bigger than me. It is only in spatial affairs that a prediction of the future, some idea of success being, well, I got what I expected. It's only there. But what kind of fun is that? I tried my best. I called my brother-in-law who lives out in Omaha. I had him lie for me. Boy, we really put one over on that bank. Me trying to swing the loan for that new car. I had him lie about some of my background, how I'd worked, and I got some more of my friends. And I succeeded. I got them suckers to lend me $25,000 I've got to pay back. Is that success or what? Thanks to my fast thinking and my devious manner, I got them suckers to let me go $25,000 in debt. That is success. Doing this kind of thing, the fun of it is, this is not a sales pitch, but I want you to see that there is something else afoot in the body of life, is that you can't predict. It's one reason when this is operating at best speed that it sounds so vague and et cetera, as I pointed out. If somebody makes you promises or tells you get involved with such and such or some kind of activity, the Gottlieb-Wiedemeyer system, they'll make you brilliant. They'll improve your memory and will do this or that. In other words, what the future will bring. If you do this and you follow my rules and you study my book and watch my tapes and listen to my tapes and come over and visit me sometimes when I'm depressed, then in the future your memory will improve, your complexion will clear up, and people of the opposite sex will find you very attractive. And for those of you that have more minority taste and perverted, I'll work with you in private. When this is actually operating at the right level, there is no prediction to it. There is no statement. It shouldn't be coming from anybody. And you should then begin to understand yourself that you can't really say what the future involved with this is. And again, I don't mean some kind of great, weird, like, if I keep doing stuff like this, is my head going to swell up and become the size of Rhode Island? And every time I go outside, people think that I'm a creature from another planet. It is simply that what you begin to see, the information, the expansion of your own nervous system and the intellect is such that the joy is otherwise, as opposed to, well, I got what I expected. If you got what you expected, you didn't get anything. You got spatial success. And that was what I meant by the joke. I wasn't picking on a new car or having to take out a loan. Well, yeah, I was, but anyway, I wasn't. That I want you to see when you get what you expect under ordinary conditions. Nothing wrong with ordinary conditions, nothing wrong with life and having cars and etc. As all of you should know, except maybe you people getting this on tape. It's what I want you to understand. It's not some kind of attack on worldly activities or goods. But when you get what you expect, such as you got the loan, is the loan not much fun? You got the car, and I hope you love the car. But is the car open-ended fun? Is the car, when the first payment comes due, is the car as much fun a month from now as it was the day you got it? All of you should know that. Getting what you expected is the nature of spatial life. That is the way to gauge success. That my intention is to go from here to Charlotte. If you get to Charlotte, you say, I got what I expected. I thought if I go up interstate, whatever it is, that I would get there. So you got there, and it's success. That's just it. When you get outside the realm of gravitational thinking, of three-dimensional life, success or felicity, whatever the payoff for this kind of thing is. I don't mean any sort of ultimate payoff, but the continual payoff, the little bits of, I didn't want to say it, but success, if you want to call it that. Now, I'm not going to, don't say I ever use that word regarding this, but the payoff is always unexpected. And it doesn't have to be weird, it's just something that you look and you go, ah! And if I could jump out of the bushes, out of the undergrowth of your own nervous system and go, aha, I saw what you did. Now I know what happened, but what was it that triggered it? What was it? And you told me, and you had to put in words. I wouldn't do this because it'd help spoil it, but if I did, what you'd come out with is not going to be anything weird. It's just going to be, if you tried to kind of hold back, what you'd say is, I just was looking at such and such that I always do or think about or see other people do, and I just realized that from a view, not the view, from a view, I just saw something I'd never seen. What you're saying is, I saw something I never expected. I didn't expect that I'd have any sort of view, or I didn't expect that what I'm seeing now could in any way be tied to that kind of activity. In a future, for those of you that still may get confused, in the future. Let me expand on something else that popped up a few tapings back. But in the future, those who distinguish between instruction and entertainment will receive neither. That is a universal fact, not the universal fact. Can you recall even further back? It was pointed out under the auspices prevailing here that if you don't like something, you won't believe it. That's just an unrecognized, it's not just an educational tenet, it is a law of physics. Of course, it's one of my laws of physics, I'll admit. It's a more complex law of physics than these guys with high school and college education can understand. But if you don't like something, you're not going to believe it. You could tell that, I guess, to a dyed-in-the-wool, big-time city scientist, and they would say, well, that's not true. Because I would eventually, if the facts, if the theorems, if enough testing, the replication came up to statistical minimums, then no good scientist would say, well, I'm not going to believe that because I don't like that new mathematical theory. And so they would just, especially when they found out that I don't even have a GED, they just, get out of here. But it's a fact. And it's a fact even to them. It just does not come out verbally the way life is wired up in the areas that would seem to be hard education, hard facts, hard realities as opposed to the social sciences. But in those areas they do not use this kind of terminology, and so it doesn't come up. But if a scientist, and I could draw out a scenario, but I'm not going to, surely you can, it could be based upon what would seem to them as personalities. But it is true across the board on this planet. If you don't like something, and I'm not even going to define all those words, if you don't like something, you won't believe it. The corollary, which is the same thing, because in a future there are no corollaries. The corollary is, if you don't like the source, you won't believe it. Variation 2, if you don't like the person who said it, you won't believe it. Do you see any connection between that and me bringing up that in a future, those who continue to distinguish between instruction and entertainment will be unable to receive either? All right, if you don't enjoy the instruction, you didn't get any enjoyment, but you also didn't get any instruction. You may hear it and go, well, I hear exactly what the person's saying, and I can tell you this, it is definitely false. So you can say, I heard it. Now, I don't hear more. I heard it. No, I heard it. Their instruction from their level was, I've learned the man's an idiot. I've learned that there is some people walking around who have ideas that are staggeringly egregious. Wrong. Bad. Or, if they were trying to pass under a more academic climb, I guess, they might say, I don't find much favor with this, but I'll admit, I have not heard the idea expressed exactly in this way, so I'll admit. At this moment, I have insufficient data to totally condemn it. But so if you are not entertained by the information, which of course is nothing but energy, just all dressed up and they're playing doctor. You're the nurse and it's playing doctor. Even you men, it keeps wanting to pull down your pants and say, it's all right. I'm 7. When you get to be my age, you'll understand this is all right. It's just energy, but it seems to be something else. It seems to be important human stuff, like words and ideas. And opinions even. If it doesn't entertain, then you weren't entertained. If it doesn't entertain, if it did have some possibility of instruction, then you won't get it. Back to where I started this subparagraph, that if you don't like something, you won't believe it. It's just, I'm surprised or sort of disappointed that not many of you, not as many as I would hope for, have tattooed that on your bosoms to where at least I can see it. Because I'll carry you in good stead all the way from here to Charlotte. Well, at least to Greenville or at Spartanburg. But that kind of thing will get you part of the way through life. You know, some of you don't want to go very far. No, assuming, of course, you start in Georgia or Tennessee is what I'm saying. If you don't like something, you won't believe it. And there is no way that that will spring up and become a part of ordinary nervous system thinking. And people believe that they can learn and absorb and benefit from information that's even, oh, I don't know, sort of disagreeable. No, they don't. If they did, there'd be no category as disagreeable. And from there, you'd have to see that the three-dimensional world would then be exploded. That is, combined back in a sense. You have to go in another kind of direction, but the Big Bang would have expanded in such a way, not that it contracts back to a central core, but it would go in another direction to where it would all begin to be more universal to the person seeing it. To wit, what I was going to say is that you would no longer have anything wrong, because if it was wrong, you couldn't hear it. And of course, if you couldn't hear it, nobody would have ever said it. There'd be no evil. There'd be no nothing that was not instructional / entertaining. Because who's entertained to hear a lie? Nobody. Who's entertained to hear the babblings of an idiot? Nobody. Who's entertained to hear the rantings of a political opponent? Some fascist. Or if you're a fascist, some communist. Or some non-fascist. So you're not instructed by it. You can say, well, that's not funny. This man over here is making prejudicial comments about my people, about my race, about me personally, not religion. Certainly that's not entertaining. So obviously it's not instructional. Well, yeah, it is. At least I've learned who the enemy is. You don't see? The enemy is that which you can't learn from. The enemy is that which you don't like. Now, ordinary intelligence can say, well, talk about self-evident. No, you think that you don't like him because he's the enemy. Forget he, the energy. No, I go back to what I told you. If you don't like something, you won't believe it. And ordinary intelligence will say, well, boy, you sure got a slippery tongue at times, because that's almost true. At least in the example you're using, though, you made at least a partial faux pas, or in Charlotte, Fox Pass. Because in this case, it's not that I don't believe what this maniac is saying over here because I don't like him. No, no, no. Contraire. They talk like that in Spartanburg, don't they? The reason I don't like him because of what he's saying. What he's saying is he's making outlandish attacks on humanity, on some group of people. He's threatening warfare on helpless folk. So I don't like the source of it because of what he's saying. And of course then I'd have to say, well, you got me again. Caught me just flat-footed. It's not that one causes the other. It's not that one follows the other. If all you are equipped for is linear thinking, of course, one seems to follow the other, and one seems to cause this or that. But that does not belie, you cannot escape the fact that I pointed out that it's still true three-dimensionally, any way you twist it, if you're extraordinary enough to get away from the absolute hold of gravity. And that is, you will not believe anything you don't like. And you cannot escape that from any position of ordinary intellectual wiring. You cannot change that. All you can do is rise above it. All you can do is find a clearer playing field, a new building site right in here. Because everything that you don't like, you're never going to believe it. And when I say you now, we're talking about the you of the PP, the past present. We're talking about ordinary you. There is no way that you can lull yourself. There is no way that you're going to hypnotize yourself or listen to tapes or decide that, all right, I'm going back and I'm going to read Das Kapital. You know, Marx couldn't have been. There's something. My grandfather was just a fanatical anti-communist. Plus, he hated cold weather, and therefore he thought that Russia was the work of the devil. But I'm going to go back and I'm going to read the writings of Lenin and Engels, and I'm going to come up with some. Well, I'm just going to become more sophisticated. You cannot change that which you don't like, because you didn't decide to like it. But you can't do it, and you cannot believe that which you do not like. Now, you don't see any connection between that and the last 10 minutes. Oh, and someone asked me if I'd repeat the last 10 minutes. All right. You can take another quick view also as to why man, part of the purposes, the uses, if there is a difference, and man being wired up so that the ordinary intellect is continually hearkening to the past. The kind of examples I've drawn up here for the last few tapings, that the intellect continually wants to listen to and cherish ideas from the past, puts great stock in them, and not just from apparent external sources, to yourself. Because things you said that you liked, you believed them, and you keep repeating them. Whether you have occasion to respond to some external stimuli, to say something, at least you say to yourself. But there is another slight variation I was going to try and bring up of why man is wired up in such a way to have this continuing proclivity, this love, a real hearkening to voices of the past. And here, out there, in print, it's just floating around. It's like a virus if you're trying to get away from somewhere. But it's on this basis, this great hearkening to the past, to past voices and to past ideas. And once you see it, it's fairly simplistic, but life is the one that invented form following function. And of course, humans think they're so complex that the machinery of life, especially human life, is very complex. Who wants to find out that they're as simple as, I really hate to frighten anyone and say one piece of moving part machinery, one moving part piece of machinery. So I'll say a three moving parts piece of machinery. The hearkening, the cherishing, the dependence, the love of ideas from the past. voices from the past. Can you see that through what would appear to be a wider spread, like the institutionalized, a collective use of history, or the internal, or personal one of your own imagination, you can take, for instance, an ill-tempered Moses and what he said and turn him into a pussycat? Because if it stayed at the point that you didn't like, if we had movies, some home movies of Moses, and he's walking in to make a speech somewhere, and you see him turn around and he kicks around at some kid, and maybe you look and you think, when the light hits that man just right, he got a striking resemblance to W.C. Fields, and I never did like that. In other words, then you would not get assuming that Moses had some important message, or a Muhammad, or a Jesus, or of course the ever popular Gottlieb Wiedemeyer. If it's a voice from the past, and remember, make voice, put voice/idea. If it's from the past, then the apparent passage of what? Time, as they call it here. That is, history takes over. And now a Moses or a Buddha or a Gottlieb is remembered in a certain way. The source/the ideas themselves. As long as it seems to be a hearkening to the past, that is, anything but the future, which ordinary people might say is the present, it was actually the future. Anything other than that, you can turn it into, if it indeed was an independent process under your control, but this is what it would seem to be for the sake of my sketching, that you can turn the past voices, the past ideas, into any damn thing you want them to be. That is the local realities. That's why you do not have one Christian church. You've got all the splinter groups. You've got all the local churches, the local cults, the local religions. That's why you do not have a Judaism. You got, last count, 3 major splits. You got them in everything. You got them in philosophy. You got them in physics. You got them in the world of all the fields of academia. They just do not necessarily seem to be that vociferously opposed to one another. But you have got the splits. You have got the local versions, the local theories, and everything from math to theology. But it's constantly an appeal to the past. Even when they say they're talking about the future, they're still always talking about the past. I know I have jumped on that twice in the last couple of tapings, but I wanted to bring it up once more this week, and I was hoping to see somebody's face just, maybe flames coming out of your skull, and I realized, aha, when you're on, you begin to hear it. You're surrounded by it. That it's not sarcastic, it's not a criticism, it's no one's fault, and it's not a weakness. They'll bring on. They were doing it. Experts on political affairs. Yeah. Experts, and they give their credentials. Of course, their past credentials, if you ever want to think about that. Yeah. Then, of course, if you're ordinary intelligence, you could say, well, what other kind of credentials are there? But they saw it. Now, commenting on the unsuccessful coup attempted earlier this week in Panama, we have Professor so-and-so, or just Gottlieb Wiedemeyer, former Undersecretary of State for President Goldfarb, Secretary of State for International or for South American Affairs under President Green. The credentials are all in the past. But you listen, well, now we're going to get somewhere. Here's somebody that knows what's going on. So he comes on to make a comment to bring us up to date. And they say, well, now we're glad finally to have a man of your background, a man of your expertise, a man of your insight. Tell us what in the world is going on in Panama. What can we expect? So apparently they're asking what's going on right now, and where's this going to lead? How is this going to, as they like to say, impact us? What does the man do? He tells you fairy tales. But nobody knows that as he tells you, well, we should have known we were in trouble 3 years ago. When we allowed that man to stay in power, we had the opportunity. I want to tell you now, and here comes, you can hear the voice of authority. A man who has thought about it, a man who knew better at the time. If you recall, it was less than 3 years ago when he staged that coup. We at that time had enough troops around that area we could have moved in, we could have kept this person from taking power. And you can just see the interviewer, if you can't see yourself, assuming you had any kind of mechanical interest in such affairs, listening, going, huh, Yeah, well, that was a stupid administration he was at that time. You're right there. Boy, oh, you're right. What's he doing? He's telling you fairy tales, that is, the past. And if they say, well, bring us up to present, well, I'll tell you what's going on now. And he can't tell you what's going on now. He's telling you what went on, and the best he can do was, all right, the last report we heard, you know, here's how up to date he is. And this is not just him. This is the way life is wired up. All right, the last report. Now, of course, I'm no longer in the government, but I still have my contacts in Washington. And so just before we were doing this live show right now, I was on the phone. I can't give you anybody's name, but a close source to the White House. And they were on the phone within the last 2 hours. And they said that right now in Panama City, things are calm. Not much going on. Well, thank you so much for this update. Or they might say, well, what do you see for the future? And they'll say, well, you know, if our policy is going to remain as it's been for the last 3 years, when we could have taken such and such remedial action, or if this man is going to just show his utter contempt for democratic principles, this is a response to them asking this man with the credentials, that is, past credentials. You notice I didn't really stop and try to make any of you consider, what kind of credentials is it in the past? You're going to tell me an expert, all you're telling me is he was an expert 3 years ago. He was an expert 6 months ago. Ordinary intelligence, of course, could say, well, what do you want? Of course, if I was ordinary in return, I'd say, I don't know. But this ain't it. Even if they ask him, well, tell us what, based upon your experience, you're the best. You've got the best background to respond to this, and you have really made it a lot clearer to me. You bringing up what's happened to bring us right to date. But what do you see in the closing minutes we have for the show? What do you see as the future between our great country and the people of Panama, still under the iron grip of this fanatical general? Can he talk about the future? No, he apparently will. He's all right. Now, this is my opinion. Yes, but your opinion means a lot. Okay. But I'll give you my opinion. In the future, and here it goes, you can always count on if, because that's all predictions. That's a prediction of the future is an if. If is tied to the article the, which we obviously don't have time to go into. But he is going to not tell you the future. He's going to start saying, if our policy stays as it is, if conditions in Panama do not improve, if the people do not take such and such, then things are going to stay, I suggest to you, more or less as they are now in the foreseeable future. And the interviewer will say, well, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to bring us this kind of clarifying thought, to bring us the kind of information that makes us be able to begin to get a glimpse, if I may say so, into the future. Thank you so much. Some of you by now should be having some sort of fun off on your own. You should be instructing yourself, that is, letting life instruct you, and find it entertaining, that under conditions that you never noticed, they're everywhere, of people talking about the future. Experts in things that if you're back at the earthbound level, you'll nod right along. And nobody can talk about the future. They will talk about the future, but they're not even talking about the future. They're obviously not talking about a future. And if you begin to hear it, they're not really thinking in the future. It's not predictions of in the future. It's always if. It's always about the. And you know it's not a valid prediction. You don't know why. But you will listen. Life is wired up so people go, yeah. Or, of course, someone could go, oh, no. No, never happened. No, it's just a response that definitely not. And somebody saying definitely so. You can look at it this way. The past can please everybody. Yeah.